Hey everyone, it's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So I don't know if I'm crazy or what, but I really love painting these monochrome mountain scenes. And in this video, I'm going to show you a few of the techniques I use and some of the tricks I figured out along the way. This video is great for beginners and also for some of you more advanced painters who just want to kind of chill out, loosen up, and paint something spontaneous. So I've already got the paper texture already in here, and this time I'm using the St. Petersburg texture. And this is because it has a somewhat larger texture pattern on it, but it's still pretty soft and it really suits this style. For the brushes, I'm going to use the regular watercolor brush kit, and I'm also going to use the Alpine forced brush kit a tiny bit, but that one's optional. I'm just using it for one of the pine tree brushes. So to start painting here, I'm just going to select a blank layer underneath the paper texture, just like you normally would. And for the brush, I'm going to use the abstract round brush, and this is one from the regular watercolor kit. And for the color, I'm going to set it to this kind of dark, I guess it's almost like an indigo blue color. And at the largest size, I'll just sort of rough out a kind of a mountain ridge line. So I'm going to start very lightly, just kind of jog it back and forth. I'm also varying the pressure quite a bit, creating some kind of flat lines, then softening it up. And I guess the main thing is, I'm trying to keep the angles sort of realistic, and also I don't want a lot of really smooth areas. So when this happens, I'll just go over it again and just sort of add a little bit of small detail in there. And once the ridge line is all done, I'm going to go over it again just below the ridge line and just try to add just a suggestion of detail there, just as if there was another range kind of in the foreground. And this one is much easier. I'm not worrying about the angles or the smoothness. It's very, very loose. And after that, I'm going to grab the water blender brush, again part of the regular watercolor kit, and I'll use it at almost the largest size, and I'm just going to blend the bottom edge of the ridge here. And I think one of the key things, one of the tricks I discovered here, is it looks best if you keep these blending lines in one direction. So I'm going to do it at an angle kind of like this. And then also once you get towards the ends here, it does look nice if you just kind of soften those until they totally lose definition. Next, I'm going to go in there again with the water blender, but this time I'm going to use it at a lot smaller of a size, maybe around 25%. And I'm still going with this kind of blending direction, but I'm going to wiggle it back and forth. And what I'm trying to do here is just give the suggestion that kind of tendrils of mist are just kind of curling up. If I just leave it with these large and smooth strokes, it looks fine, but I personally like to add some kind of smaller details in the blending. Now I'm starting to see the shapes of these mountains, and at this point I like to go in there with the eraser and kind of define the ridge line a little bit more. So in the case of this one here, I don't really like that it's rounded. I want these to be very pointy. So I'm going to grab the eraser brush, and I've got it set to the fine liner pen. And at a really small size, I'll just go in there and try to make this look a little bit more pointy, a little bit more jagged. And after that, I'll just go along the whole ridge line, and wherever I see some smooth areas, I'll just use the eraser again to kind of rough it up. So for whatever reason, I've always felt like the more distant the mountains are, the more jagged and rough they are like this, the closer they get to you, they start to go through a stage where they're sort of more smoother and rolling. And then the very last stage of mountains or hills that are closest to you, they actually aren't mountains at all. They're just a bunch of tiny rows of trees. So they have that kind of jagged texture again. And I think that kind of layering is a good recipe for a painting like this. So if I wanted to do some slightly closer mountains, I'm just going to grab the abstract round brush again. I still have that other color selected, and I'll use it at a pretty large size. And I'll do another row here, but these ones are going to be a little bit more smoother and a little bit more rounded. And just like before, I'll go over them again, just to add a little bit more detail where the brush strokes are kind of overlapping. And I'll use the water blender, same thing as before, pretty large size, and I'll just soften up the bottom. But also as the mountains get closer to me, I'm going to try to make the angle more vertical. So as before, the distant mountains had that kind of angular stroke. These ones, I'm gonna mostly do it up and down. And for the closest ridge line here, this is the one that's gonna have the trees, and that's where I'm gonna use the Alpine Forest brush kit. It just has a lot of tree brushes. You could, of course, paint the trees by hand. This is just kind of a time-saving thing. So in the Alpine Forest brush kit, I'm gonna use the fine abstract round pine, and I'm gonna use it at a really small size. Let's test it out here. Yeah, I think that'll work. And I'm still working on the same layer here, so I think we can do all of this painting on one layer. And I'm just gonna do a bunch of tiny trees in a row all the way across the canvas here. And after that, I'm just gonna grab the water blender brush again. There's one at the bottom of this brush kit, but I'll just go back to the regular brush kit and use the normal water blender. And same as before, pretty large size, maybe around 70%. And I'm just gonna soften and blur the bottom of this. And I'm trying to imagine in my head as if like mist was kind of rising up and obscuring the bottom of these trees. And one trick with this one here is in some areas I'm pushing up and it creates a very hard kind of white boundary there. But in other areas I'm making sure that I'm also pulling it down and sort of dragging out this kind of light gray color. And having a variety of shades of gray in that mist makes it look kind of deeper. And this by itself could be done. I mean, even just the distant mountain with the mist is pretty minimalist and pretty interesting just by itself. Now, if you wanted to keep adding on to this and add more trees, you could do another layer in the foreground. So I'll go back to the Alpine Forest brush kit, same brush here, fine abstract pine. But before I used it at a really tiny size, this time I'm gonna use it at a pretty large size. And I'll just do a couple of pine trees that are much taller and much bigger, just randomly, maybe in 3 places here in the foreground. And I'll just grab the same water blender I used before, pretty large size, and I'll soften the bottoms of these trees as well. And I guess the trick here with the foreground trees is when I blur the bottom, I'm trying to blur them at different levels, so there's a little bit more depth going on. So this one is a little bit closer than those ones, and I'm also trying to blur them at an angle. So by making the blending like this, it does give an impression that within those trees, some of those are closer or further away. And there we go. I think just to finish this one up, I'm gonna add some birds. So I'm gonna grab the fine liner pen. I'm gonna use it at a really small size, and just out there in the distance, kind of above the mountains, I'll just do a couple of these V shapes. Maybe over here as well. And there we go. This one is all done. And I'll show you what it looks like when I print it out in a second here, but hang on, because after that, I'm gonna show you another trick that will bring the scene to the next level. So when I print it out, I always feel like it looks even better than it did on the screen. It's just something else to hold the artwork in your hand. It's just much more inspiring. So if you have more time for painting and you want to take this scene to the next level, I'm going to add a kind of a reflecting lake in the foreground. So I'm going to grab my abstract round brush again. We still have the same color. We're still on the same layer. And I'm going to imagine a line, a kind of horizon line. And I'll just do a bunch of random kind of blobs like this. I just want a variety of shapes here. And after that, I'm just going to grab the water blender brush again, kind of a smaller size than before, maybe around 30%. And I'm going to blend the top and the bottom of it in just a bunch of random areas. I need to be careful though, because we're still on that one layer, so I don't want to accidentally blend up the previous trees or something. So I'm just going to be careful and blend this a little. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now I want to cut it. So I'm going to grab the selection tool. It's set to rectangle. I'll make a rectangle and just set the edge there just so it kind of cuts through that shoreline we drew. I think something like that will look good. Then I'll just open the layers panel. Here's the layer we've been working on. I'll just tap on it. And then when I click clear, it just clears everything within that selection box. And that's how we kind of establish the shoreline. Next, I'm going to make a new layer. I've still got this dark color selected. I'm going to grab the abstract round brush, kind of a large size, and I'll rough out kind of a box down here like this. So once I've got this kind of background wash laid down, I'll grab the water blender, pretty large size, and I'll just mix this up a little bit. And this is just to create some kind of interesting texture in there. Now, when you look at a reflection, as it gets closer to you, it's more likely to be darker. In the distance, it's gonna be a little bit lighter. So I'm just gonna pull down the top here of this and just create a kind of white edge up there. And next, I'm gonna open the layers panel back up here. Here's our original artwork. I'm gonna make a copy of it. I'm gonna place it above that kind of background wash here. Then I'm gonna grab the arrow tool, and where it says flip vertical, when I do that, it just flips the artwork like that and mirrors it. So I can drag this mirror image down here, and I'll line it up on the shoreline, but I don't want it to be perfect. I'm gonna try to leave a little bit of a gap there. I'm gonna set this reflection here to multiply. I'll lower it to 0, then I'm gonna raise it back up, and I want the reflection to be kind of less defined as the real image, right? And because we're doing it on top of this background wash thing, it's always going to be a little bit darker, and that's the key here to make this kind of realistic. Now I've got all these 3 layers. I'm just going to pinch them together and merge them together like that. I'll grab the water blender again, and I'm going to blend the reflection here because I don't want it to be too perfect. So I'll leave a couple of things kind of well defined, but especially out here in the mountains, I'm going to try to make those really soft. And if you look closely here, we have this kind of laser straight line on the shoreline. I want to rough that up and make it look a little more authentic. So I'm going to grab the eraser brush. It's set to the fine liner pen. I'll turn this whole thing sideways. And at kind of a medium size, I guess, maybe like 20%, I'm just going to follow along that line. And I'm going to go thin, just using very light pressure. Then I'll press a little bit harder, and I'll just create this kind of variegated line. And if you want to add some kind of waves, I guess, in the water, you could just turn it sideways using the same eraser brush and just add a couple of very thin white lines. And it's kind of important that they start very, very thin, get a little bit thicker, and then kind of taper off again. And I'll just do a few of those kind of randomly. And there we go. This peaceful kind of Zen mountain scene is all done. And here's what it looks like when I print it out. I think this process is just really relaxing for me, and that's why I like it. Sometimes I get in this mood where I don't feel satisfied or motivated with some project I'm working on. I'm always trying to push the boundaries of my current skill, so sometimes art isn't necessarily as relaxing as it should be. And all of us do that eventually, but it's important to remember that you have to go back to basics once in a while and sort of rediscover that peaceful, quiet place inside of all of us. And I think with that, it pretty much wraps it up. As always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.